Okay, guys, we'll be discussing the last financial statement, which is the statement of cash flows. So, throughout the discussion, I would like you to perform the problem that I'll be presenting in here. And if you have any question, just feel free to send me an email, to put a comment below, and I'll address it, okay, as soon as I can. Right, so let's start. Our learning objectives first is to discuss the components and structure of cash flow statement, identify the transactions if it's financing, investing, or operating, and lastly is to prepare a cash flow statement. So before we move forward to the statement of cash flow, let's just have a quick recap on our session last time. So last week we have talked about the statement of changes in equity, and we learned the different forms of business organization. Sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. Next, you're able to differentiate the statement of changes in equity. And lastly, you now know how to prepare a statement of changes in equity for a single proprietorship. Again, partnership and corporations statement of changes in equity will be tackled more on your higher accounting. Right, so again, let's define financial statement. Ulit-ulit natin tong minimension. It's a structured representation of the financial position, performance of an entity. Objective is to provide information about the financial position, financial performance, and of course, cash flow of an entity. This is useful to a wide range of users in making economic decisions. So in here, it's also a result of management stewardship. And to meet this objective, financial statements provide information about an entity. So yung 1, 2, 3 asset, liabilities, and equity, those are part of the statement of financial position or your balance sheet. Number 4, income and expense, including gains and losses. We have discussed it during the statement of comprehensive income session and income statement. Number 5, contributions by and distributions to owners in their capacity as owners. So ito naman yung statement of changes in equity. This was our previous session. And of course, number 6, cash flow. So we'll be focusing on the cash flow now. Statement of cash flow. So before we move forward, ano ba yung cash flow? Let's put it as simple as this. Word itself, cash flow. So when we say cash, pera, flow, it's the movement, right? So when we are talking about cash flow, we are talking about ano yung mga perang pumasok at lumabas sa isang entity. So it's basically the movement of your cash, for itself cash, going in and out of the entity. So pag bumili ka kanwari ng isang equipment, ibig sabihin, kakaroon ka ng equipment, mawawalan ka ng pera. That's a cash outflow sa company mo. Nagbenta ka, kunwari may bakery ka, nagbenta ka ng tinapay, 3 pesos isa, di ba? So, yung binenta mong tinapay lalabas sa'yo, pero papasukan ka naman ng 3 pesos. That is your sales revenue. So, cash inflow naman yung tawag doon. As simple as that. So, when we say cash flow, it's basically the movement lang ng pera paglabas at pagpasok sa kumpanya. Okay. Of course, let's not forget the notes of financial statement. It brings additional information regarding the details on the financial statement. Right, so activities related to cash flow. There are basically 3 activities when we are talking about cash flow. So ano-ano ba to? First, we have the operating activities. When we say operating activities, these are the activities related to the main revenue generating activities of providing goods and services. So, example ng operating activity is your sales revenue. Kunwari, example ko nga kanina. So, nagbenta ka ng tinapay. Yung perang pumasok sa'yo out of selling that bread, that is a part of your operating activity kasi ang major line of business mo, or main line of business mo is the bakery, which is to sell a bread, a cakes, diba? So, yung perang papasok sa'yo because of selling those items, those are under operating activities. Another thing, yung sahod ng nagtitinda ng tinapay, yung renta ng bakery, yung Meralco bill nyo because of selling those bread, yung water bill nyo, yung inventory mo, yung mga pinambili mo ng mga flour, diba? So those are basically related to your main business. So that's why they are treated as operating activities. So saan mo siya normally makikita? Ma'am, parang nakakalito yata isipin kung ano-ano yung mga transactions under operating activities. There is another technique, no? Para ma-identify nyo agad whether it's operating activity. So, normally, yung mga transactions under operating activities, this can be seen in your income statement. So, number one, income statement. Ano-ano yung mga makikita mo sa income statement? Diba kanina sinabi ko yung nagtitinda sa bakery. That's basically payroll expense. Pag pinasahod mo yon, lalabasan ka ng pera na pambayad doon sa employee mo. Another thing, yung pambayad sa tinatayuan ng bakery, that's rent expense. Meralco bill, water bill, those are utilities expense, diba? And yung income mo naman, sales revenue, that is part of your income or sales revenue. So, those are part of your income statement, yung mga items na yon. So, kapag nakakita ka ng item na alam mong papasok sa income statement, then check if it's an operating activity. Pero most likely, dito siya magpo-fall under. Okay? Next, operating activities can also be seen on your current asset portion of balance sheet. So, ano ba yung mga nasa current asset portion ng balance sheet? Unang-una, accounts receivable, di ba? Inventory. Accounts receivable, inventory, prepaid expenses. Those are current assets. So, kapag related doon yung mga transaction, those are under operating activities. So, kanwari, unang-una is nakakolekta ng accounts receivable. So, may pumasok na pera sa'yo because nakolek mo yung sales revenue mo dati on account. So, those are under operating activity. Bumili ka ng inventory, di ba? Debit, inventory, credit, cash. That is an example of cash outflow. And that is related to your operating activities. So, things like that. Another thing, current liability portion of balance sheet. So, ano-ano ba yung mga nasa current liability ko? Best example is your accounts receivable. Second is accrued expenses. So, kapag nagbayad ka ng mga bills mo, 'di ba? Mga utang mo, kunwari, example ng bill na nag-a-accrue na sa'yo, yung Meralco bill mo, di ba? Liability yun kasi na-accrue mo na siya, then at the end of the month mo pa siya babayaran. So, kapag binayaran mo na yun, magkakaroon ka ngayon ng cash outflow. Di ba? So, that is an example of a transaction under your operating activity. Right, so we are done with the first activities. First activity related to cash flow. Ano yung next, ma'am? That is our investing activity. So, investing activity, these are related to the sale and purchase of long-term assets and other investments. So, best example dito, bumili ka ng computer. So, yung pinambili mo ng computer na cash, that is an example of a cash outflow sa company mo. Then later on, you decided to sell that computer. So, kung binenta mo yung computer na asset ng company mo, syempre, mawawalan ka ng computer, papasukan ka ng pera. That is an example of your cash inflow. Other thing, long-term investments. So, if you have investments, that is an example as well of investing activity. So, saan mo normally nakikita yung mga transactions under investing activity? So, makikita mo yan sa non-current asset portion of your balance sheet. Diba yung property, plant, and equipment, computer, furniture, and fixtures, those are examples of non-current asset. So, isa na yan sa mga technique mo on identifying whether it is an operating or investing activity. Kasi si operating, those are basically the current asset, those are seen on the current asset portion of your balance sheet. Whereas si investing naman, may kita mo naman siya sa non-current asset portion of your balance sheet. So, that is one identifier din para hindi ka malito. Alright, so alam na natin yung first two. Last activity related to cash flow is the financing activities. So when we say financing activities, this is related to the acquisition of funding for the use of an entity. So ano ba to? When we say financing activity, these are the activities related para makapag-produce ng pera yung kumpanya to use in financing the entity. So for example, if it is the beginning of the business, I mean, this is to start the business, yung initial cash layout or initial cash contribution ng owner to the company, that is one example of financing activity. Okay? Another thing, umutang ka ng pera sa bangko, long-term loan. So, yung loan na yun, if wala pa yung purpose, basically you are borrowing something from the bank dahil gagamitin mo sa pag-finance ng business related activities mo, or if you have future planned expansion. So, you can use that money in financing those types of activities. So, saan ko naman normally makikita to? Makikita mo naman siya sa non-current liability portion of balance sheet. Diba yung long-term loan? So, when we say long-term loan, that is an example of a liability. And the word itself, long-term, so non-current siya. Right? And another thing, makikita mo na siya sa equity portion of your balance sheet. So, yung contribution by the owner, we've already discussed it. It's a part of your statement of changes in equity. So equity can be found on your equity, on the equity section of your balance sheet. So hindi siya nakakalito actually if alam mo yung other term niya. So when we say operating, identify mo, nakikita ko ba to sa income statement, current asset portion, current liability portion of my balance sheet? If your answer is yes, then that is an operating activity. When it comes to investing naman, check mo, is it a non-current asset transaction? Bumili ako ng computer. That's basically a non-current asset transaction, di ba? So, you can immediately identify na, ay, this is an investing activity. And lastly, financing. So, yung pera ba na pumasok sa akin, ang galing ba to sa bangko, loan, for me to use in financing my business? Then, if your answer is yes, then that is under the financing activity. So, dito lang sa tatlong activities na to, iikot yung statement of cash flow. Kaya it's really important na alam nyo kung saan siya related na activities. 'Di ba? Alam mo kung asset ba to, kung liability ba to, kung part pa to ng equity, part pa to ng income statement. Kasi it would really help you in assessing whether you were able to identify that activity sa operating, investing, and financing. Okay, so let's move on. First activity is the operating. Other term is the net income activities. Pwede mo rin siyang tawagin na current asset or current liability activities. Umpisahan natin yung mga examples ng cash inflow. So, unang-una, cash received from sales and service revenue. So, kagaya ng example natin kanina, yung bakery, nagbenta ka ng tinapay, pumasok yung pera sa'yo, yung perang pumasok sa'yo, that is an example of cash inflow from operating activity. Next, collection of accounts receivable. So, for example, nagtitinda ka ng tinapay. Ikaw si A. Okay? And then si B lumapit sa'yo. A, pautang naman ako ng tinapay worth 200 pesos. Wala kasi akong cash dito eh. Babayaran ko din tomorrow. Okay? So, tomorrow pa daw babayaran. Sabihin natin day 1 ngayon. Okay. So, since day 1, nagkaroon ka ng sales basically kasi sabing ganun sa'yo ni B pabili. So, that is already a part of your sale. Pero, sales on account. Kasi uutangin muna sa'yo ni B. So, kung ilalagay natin siya sa entry, debit accounts receivable, okay? And then credit sales. That is your entry ngayon, ngayong day 1. Pero the following day, as promised, bumalik sa'yo si B. Ito na pala yung 200 pesos para sa utang ko sa'yo yesterday. So, ngayon pa lang nagkakaroon ng cash inflow transaction yung company mo. So, ma'am, ano magiging entry ko doon? Di debit cash kasi pumasok sa'yo yung cash. And then credit accounts receivable, meaning mawawalan ka na ng receivable dahil binayaran na siya sa'yo. So, wala nang may utang sa'yo. Okay? So, that is an example of cash inflow as well. Right. So, guys, huwag kayo malilito If it's a sale on account, wala siyang, hindi siya magiging part ng statement of cash flow mo until the time na binayaran na sa'yo yung utang. Okay? And another example, refunds from supplier. An example, niyan? Refunds from supplier. Kunwari, bumili ka ng flour, di ba? Tapos, pagdating sa'yo nung supplies, may amag pala. So, what do you need to do? You need to return it to your supplier. Sabi sa'yo ng supplier, ma'am, wala na kasi akong other supplies. Last na talaga yan. Then, you are left with no choice, diba? So, ang gagawin ngayon, bibigyan ka ng refund ni supplier. So, since babalik sa'yo yung pera, papasok ulit sa'yo yung pera, that is also an example of cash inflow. Okay? So, kailangan lang i-reiterate natin na we're not talking about kumita ba ako out of that cash. No, irrelevant siya when we are talking about statement of cash flow. Ang mahalaga sa atin, alam natin na pumasok tong pera na to at lumabas tong pera na to, whether it's a loss or gain sa business mo. Alright, so we're done with the cash inflows. Now, for the cash outflows, payment to supplier. So, example ulit, bumili ka ng flour, definitely. Pero, yung cash na binayad mo kay supplier, that is an example of cash outflow, di ba? Nawalan ka ng pera, napalitan ng flour. So, cash outflow yon. Second, payment of operating expenses like salaries, rents, utilities, and taxes. So, yung mga pambayad mo, yung mga binayad mo for your salaries expense, renta mo sa bakery, pambayad sa Meralco, sa water bill, sa income taxes, those are cash outflows then under operating activities. Next, payment of interest expense. Gusto ko lang mag-focus dito sa payment of interest expense. Bakit? 'Di ba, normally nagkakaroon ka lang naman ng interest expense kapag meron kang utang. So, ma'am, 'di ba sabi mo kanina kapag long-term loan or loan sa bank, that is under financing, bakit nandyan ngayon yung interest expense sa operating activity? Tama naman, 'di ba? Yung principal loan, if ayun yung given sa problem, then definitely that is a financing activity. Pero when we are talking about interest expense, that is an operating activity. Ma'am, bakit? Siyempre kasi etong interest expense na to, hindi na siya ginagamit to finance the business. This is incidental doon sa loan mo. So, wag kayo malilito. The principal loan is a financing activity. However, yung interest expense, which is only an incident to your principal loan, that is an operating activity. Okay? So, that is an example of a cash outflow. Next, charity contribution. So, charity contribution, this is merely a donation to charity. Of course, nagbibigay ka ng pera sa charity, that's cash outflow. And lastly, cash refunds to customers. So, other way around naman, si B, bumili sa'yo, maya-maya bumabalik na sa'yo si B, uy, may amag tong binibenta mo, akin na yung binayad ko sa'yo kanina, sa'yo na tong tinapay mo. So, if that's the case, nagbenta ka ng sirang tinapay, then you have to process refund to your customer. Meaning, yung nirecord mo kanina na inflow na pumasok sa yung pera, ilalabas mo uli, magiging outflow siya. Okay? So, these are the examples of your cash inflows and outflows under operating activities. But just wanted to note that it is not limited to this. So, in your higher accounting subjects, mas marami pang transactions ang papasok sa operating activities. But, these are the most applicable. Diba? Ito yung lagi-lagi yung may encounter when answering a problem. Okay? So, let's move on to investing activities. It is also known as the non-current assets activities. So, hindi siya nakakalito. Kasi isa lang tatandaan mo unlike si operating income statement, current asset, current liability, ang dami ma'am. So, ka-investing, hindi. Isa lang, non-current asset activity. So, example of cash inflows, cash proceeds from selling of non-current assets such as property, plant, and equipment. So, meron kang computer, may bagong labas na model, gusto mong bilhin yung bagong labas na model pero meron ka pang ginagamit ngayon, so nagplan kang ibenta. So yung sale from selling, yung cash proceeds from selling that computer is an example of cash inflow from investing activity. Next, cash proceeds from selling investments in equity securities of other companies. For example, you have equity securities or investments in other companies. Kunwari, kay Jollibee, tapos nakita mo, ay, ang taas na ng shares ni Jollibee ngayon. Benta ko na nga yan. So, binenta mo na ngayon yung shares of stocks mo kay, na hawak-hawak mo kay Jollibee. So, mawawalan ka ngayon ng stocks, pero magkakaroon ka naman ng pera. So, yung cash proceeds from your investments is an investing activity. And it's a cash inflow. So, for your cash outflow naman, payments for purchase of non-current assets, such as property, plant, and equipment. So, syempre kanina, binenta mo yung old computer mo, 'di ba? Nagkaroon ka ng pera. So, ngayon naman, binenta mo yon dahil bibili ka ng panibagong model ng computer. So, yung ibabayad mo, pambili ng bagong computer, then that's a cash outflow. Right? Next, payments to acquire investment in equity security. So, ito naman, nakita mo, ay, ang ganda ng performance ng company na to. Gusto ko magkaroon ng investment dyan. So, yung investment na ibibigay mo doon, na ilalagay mo doon sa company na yon to acquire an equity security or long-term investment. That's an example of cash outflow under investing activities. Okay. And lastly, we have financing activities. So, other term is non-current liabilities and equity activities. So, another technique ulit yan ha, para ma-identify nyo agad whether it's financing, operating, or investing activities. So, example of inflows, number one, cash investments by the owner. So, initial cash layout ng owner para i-finance yung business is a cash investment, an example of financing activity inflow. Next, cash proceeds from issuance of share capital. So, naman ba itong share capital na to? Ba't ba meron yan? Nabibili ba yan? So, when we say share capital, ito yung share mo sa isang corporation. So, normally, it is evidenced by a stock certificate. So, kanwari, si A, siya yung corporation, si B, siya yung investor. Ang gagawin ngayon ni A, i-issuean kanya ng stock certificate. Sabi din sa stock certificate, issuance of 300,000 worth of share capital. 'Di ba? So, ang gagawin ngayon ni B, magbibigay sa'yo ngayon ng 300,000. So, meaning, since binigyan ka ni A ng share capital, part owner ka na ngayon ng corporation. Ang tawag na sa'yo ngayon, shareholders. Okay? So, ang nangyari kay company ngayon, nagkaroon siya ng cash inflow, which is yung binayad sa'yo ni B, na investor mo na, in exchange for a share capital. So, again, cash proceeds from issuance of share capital is a financing activity. And also, it can be found on your equity section. So, hindi siya nakakalito. Lastly, cash proceeds from long-term borrowing. So, umutang ka kay bank, si bangko binigyan ka ng pera, that is an inflow and a financing activity. And normally, yung mga liabilities kay bank are non-current liabilities kasi payable yan in 2, 3, 5 years time. Okay? So, for cash outflow naman, cash withdrawal by the owner. So, si owner, for personal emergencies, kumuha ng pera sa company. Diba? That is part of your statement of changes in equity then. Withdrawal by the owner for personal use. So it's an example of cash outflow under financing activities. Next, payments of cash dividends to shareholders. So we all know that a corporation's way of distributing income is through dividends. So, ibig sabihin, kapag nag-release ka or nag-declare and pay ka ng cash dividends to your shareholders, that would constitute a cash outflow. Alright? So, it is important na paid yung dividend. Hindi declared lang. Kasi when we say declaration of cash dividends, wala pang cash layout doon. Until the time na nababayaran na siya. And lastly, payments of long-term borrowing. So, yung inutang mong pera kanina kay bangko, babayaran mo na ngayon, that is an example of cash outflow. But then again, example, inutang mo 1 million, ang interest doon 120,000. Yung 1 million lang yung financing activity. Yung 120,000 na interest expense is an example of cash outflow from operating activity. Okay? So, that should do it. Problem na tayo. There are two methods sa statement of cash flow. So, first is the direct method. Second is the indirect method. Direct method, sobrang dali nito. It's user-friendly. Bakit siya naging user-friendly? Kasi kapag tinignan mo yung statement of cash flow, makikita mo agad, marami palang cash tong company na to kasi madami siyang utang. Okay? Kasi nag-reflect doon na maraming pera because of financing activities. Or, ay, ang dami palang cash nitong kumpanya na to kasi binenta nila lahat halos ng assets nila. Wala na natira sa kanila. Pero wala naman silang cash because of operating activities. So, by just looking at it, makikita agad ng investor or ng users ng statement of cash flow na mukhang hindi masyadong magandang kumpanya to. Okay? Kaya siya tinawag na user-friendly. Whereas, yung indirect method naman, that is accountant-friendly. Kasi, pag tinignan siya ni accountant, okay. So, okay pala yung net income namin, maraming mga cash transactions. So far, wala naman tayong masyadong receivables, wala naman tayong masyadong payables. Yan. So, if you're an accountant, mas magiging preference mo na gamitin yung indirect method. Pero since student tayo, mag-focus tayo sa direct method. But later on, papasadahan din natin yung indirect. Okay? So, problem, Anna, the owner of ABM company, invested 3 million to start a business and purchased a computer equipment worth 180,000 and office furniture worth 90,000. During the year, 750,000 revenues were earned, 200,000 of which were on account. Salaries paid to employees amounted to 260,000. Office rent payment is 360,000 and utilities paid amounted to 40,000. Receivables collected amounted to 95,000. The owner withdrew 120,000 for personal emergency. At a time when the carrying value of the furniture was 80,000, Anna sold it for 120,000 cash. So we have 5 questions in here. First, how much is the entity's cash flow from operating activities? How about from investing, from financing? And how much is the cash balance at the end of the year? And lastly, is for you to prepare the entity's statement of cash flows. Okay. So, pause nyo muna tong problem dito and try answering it on your own. Though na-discuss na natin siya in our previous class. Pero, stop muna kayo dito. Sagutan nyo siya. How much is the ending cash? Magkano yung under operating? Magkano yung under investing? Magkano yung under financing? And then, prepare your statement of cash flow. If you are done with it, then proceed ka sa problem to reveal the answer. Okay? So, considering you are okay, so let's start the solution. Let's start with the solution. So, in answering this type of problem, first thing that you need to do is to prepare a T account. Okay? Bakit T account, ma'am? And bakit cash yun nandiyan sa taas? So, sa mga nalilito pa rin hanggang ngayon, when we are talking about statement of cash flow, pinag-uusapan natin dito magkano yung ilalagay kong cash sa balance sheet ko? At dito mo makikita yon sa statement of cash flow. Right? So, cash is a part of your balance sheet under current asset and the normal balance ng asset ay debit, 'di ba? So, yung mga nasa debit side, these are basically cash inflows. And yung mga nasa credit, these are cash outflows. So, umpisahan natin. Anna invested 3 million to start the business. So, nag-invest siya, contribution by the owner, that is an inflow. Kaya siya nasa debit side, 3 million. Bigyan tayo natin ng pointer. Wait lang. Ayan, 3 million. Right. Next, purchase a computer equipment worth 180,000. So, purchase daw, ayan, 180. So, again, bumili ka. So, kung bumili ka, nagkaroon ka ngayon ng cash outflow. Kaya nasa credit side siya. Same with the office furniture worth 90,000. So, same din, bumili ka rin, 90K. During the year, 760,000 revenues were earned, 200,000 of which were on account. So, kumita ka daw. Nagkaroon ka ng revenue. Ma'am, bakit 550 lang yan nandyan? Cash received from the customer. So, later discuss natin siya. But for now, let's leave it here. Balikan natin tong 550,000. Next, salaries paid to employees amounted to 260. So, nagbayad ka raw ng salaries expense. Ang sahod ng mga empleyado mo, 260. So, kung nagbayad ka, nawalan ka ng pera ngayon, di ba? So, you have credit, 260,000. Next, office rent payment is 360. So, rent expense mo, 360. Again, cash outflow. Utilities paid amounted to 40,000. So, utilities expense, 40,000 din. Receivables collected amounted to 95. So, nakakollect ka ng receivable. Collection of receivables, 95,000. Debit kasi nakakolekta ka eh. So, inflow siya. The owner withdrew 120 for personal emergency. So, may withdrawal daw. Naglabas ka ngayon ng pera, 120. At the time when the carrying value of furniture was 80K, Anna sold it for 120 cash. So, binenta mo yung furniture mo, of course, nagkaroon ka ng pera, 120. So, kanina sabi ko itong 550, babalikan natin siya. But ano ba nangyari dyan, ma'am? Ba't naging 550? 750 yung sales ko. Alright, so ganito kasi. Yung 550 na yan, di ba ang revenue mo is 750? Ayan. Pero yung 200 doon were on account, meaning utang yung 200. So, ibig sabihin, 550 lang talaga yung cash na pumasok sa'yo. Cash received from customer, 560,000. Ngayon, itong 200,000 na to, di ba later dun sa problem sabi, receivables collected amounted to 95K. So, eto, nakasingil ka pa uli ng 95K. So, may 105,000 ka pa accounts receivable. Ma'am, paano yung 105,000 na yon? So, yung 105,000 na yon, baka babayaran na lang ni buyer next year. So, depende. Pero, it doesn't change the fact na eto lang talaga yung nakolekta kong cash. Right? So, regardless kung ano na mangyari dun sa 105,000, ang concern lang ni statement of cash flow is magkano yung pumasok na cash sa akin. Okay? So, may answer na ba tayo sa number 4? Actually, hindi pa. Pero kung ang question is, how much is the net cash flow? Ito ang sagot. 2,715,000. Ma'am, paano nakuha yung 2,715? So, add mo lang lahat ng inflows mo, 3,765. Lahat ng outflows mo, 1,050,000, subtract mo silang dalawa, then you'll arrive at your balance, 2,715. So, cash flow siya. Inflow, mas madami kasi 3,700, tas ang outflow mo, 1,050,000. So, positive ka pa rin. Right. So, ma'am, bakit hindi pa yan yung answer dun sa ending cash ko? Kasi, kapag ang tinatanong is how much is the ending cash, you have to check din, baka naman merong beginning cash. Diba? Nung nagsimula ba yung kumpanya, meron ba silang cash on hand? Sa simula, kanwari, meron 10,000 na cash sa umpisa. Diba? So, if that's the case, then, ang ending cash ko is itong net cash flow plus yung beginning cash ko na 10,000. So, the answer should be 2,725,000 kung meron kang cash beginning. Pero, sa problem naman natin, it appears na parang wala namang cash beginning. So, meaning, etong 2,750 na to, this is also our answer din sa number 4. Dahil wala tayong cash beginning. Right, so let's move forward. So dito, from our T account, we need to identify ano yung pumasok sa operating, ano yung pumasok sa investing, at ano yung pumasok sa financing activities. So isa-isahin natin. Investment by the owner. So investment by the owner is an equity activity. If it's an equity activity, then it's a financing activity. Next, cash received from customer. So, customer, sabing ganun, edi it's the main line of business of the company. So, si 550, pumasok siya under operating. Collection of receivables. So, kung ito ay receivables, basically from customers din to, so operating activity. Sale of furniture. Again, furniture is a non-current. Non-current asset activities are investing activities. So, dito tayo papasok sa investing activities. So, tapos na tayo lahat doon sa cash inflow. Dito naman tayo sa cash outflow. So, purchase of computer. Bibili ka daw ng computer. Computer is a non-current asset. Non-current asset is an investing activity. So, si 180, papasok siya kay investing, pero negative. Bakit? Kasi this is an outflow. Purchase kasi siya. Same with the purchase of furniture. So, same logic. Apply mo lang yon. Next, you have your salaries expense amounting to 260,000. Again, income statement activity, net income activity, dun papasok si salaries expense. So, si 260, nasa operating activity. Same with your rent expense, operating din. Utilities expense, operating din. And last, withdrawal by the owner. So, again, withdrawal by the owner, this is part of your statement of changes in equity. Equity activities are financing activities. So, dito siya papasok. Okay? So, ang total operating activities natin is negative 15,000. So, meaning, mas maraming lumabas na pera kaysa yung pumasok. For investing, negative 150,000. Same, mas maraming lumabas na pera kaysa yung pumasok. And for financing activity, 2,880,000. Inflow. Mas marami yung pumasok na pera kaysa yung lumabas. So, by just looking at this, malalaman mo na ay, okay. So, majority pala ng cash ng kumpanya is because of the capital contribution ng owner. Pero kung titingnan mo, wala naman talagang kita. Diba? Walang kita. Ito, puro bili. Puro bili yung nangyari. Okay, marami tayong cash, 2,880,000. Pero, this is from the personal pocket nga ng owner. Okay. So, add mo lang, negative 15 plus negative 150 plus 2,880. Pag tinotal mo, 2,715. That is similar to this, to your T account. So, ang ginawa lang natin, binrake lang natin sa 3 activities itong T account natin. Pero, it will still arrive at the same answer, 2,715. Okay, so let's move on. Another requirement is for us to prepare a statement of cash flow. So, your statement of cash flow, kailangan ganito itsura niya under the direct method. So, of course, let's not forget the heading. Again, marami pa rin nakakalimot ng heading. Huwag niyo siyang kakalimutan. Okay? Lahat ng statement nyo, lalagyan niyo lagi ng heading. Whether it's a statement that changes in equity, comprehensive income, financial position. So, kailangan yon. Bakit? Siyempre, hindi naman manguhula yung user mo. Ano bang uri ng statement yung binabasa niya? So, it's really important na lalagyan mo talaga ng name o ng header yung mga statements na ginagawa mo. Okay? So, ganito lang siya. Nilatag lang lahat ng cash flow from operating activities. Nag-arrive siya sa net cash from operating na negative 15,000. Cash flow from investing, so negative 150. Cash flow from financing, nilatag lang din niya. So, 2,880, in-add ko siya lahat, and I arrived at my net cash flow of 2,715,000, which is also similar to this one. Ano ito yung sinasabi ko sa'yo kanina? You have to add your cash at the beginning of the year. Pero since sa problem natin, wala namang binigay, so 0. And yung cash ending mo nga talaga is 2,715,000. So guys, you have to be careful dito sa ganitong given ha. Kasi baka i-ignore nyo na yung cash beginning. Mamamali yung sagot nyo. You need to add the two. The net cash flow plus your cash at the beginning of the year in order for you to get your cash ending. Okay? So, that should do it. Ayun yung answer sa problem number 1. I hope clear tayo sa direct method. So, we can proceed to our next topic, which is the indirect method. So, when we say indirect method, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, this is an accountant-friendly method. So, it is prepared in the following manner. The presentation of cash flow from operating activities starts with net income. So, nagsisimula daw siya sa net income, adjusted with non-cash expenses. So, when we say non-cash expenses, best example niyan is your depreciation. Depreciation, we all know that it's a type of expense. Pero, wala ka namang cash outlay doon. Wala kang cash outflow doon. Unlike ng rent expense, so magbabayad ka. Unlike ng salaries expense, babayaran mo yung tao. Si depreciation, it decreases your income. Deduction siya sa income mo. Pero, hindi ka naman naglalabas ng pera. So, mababa yung income mo because you are treating an expense na non-cash. Saan ba nanggagaling ang depreciation? Ito yung reason ng ito yung expense na associated sa pagbaba ng value ng isang asset. Okay. So, ang ginagawa natin, ina-adjust natin ngayon yung net income by adding it back sa net income. Kasi, kailangan nating makuha magkano lang ba talaga yung may mga yung mga transactions na merong merong impact sa cash flow. Si depreciation, wala naman siyang impact sa cash flow Pero ba't mo siya dinideduct? So, for purposes of statement of cash flow, ina-add back natin siya. Later, makikita nyo siya sa formula. And changes in working capital daw. So, when we say working capital, it's the difference between your current asset minus your current liability. So, malilito current asset minus current liability is your working capital. So, for operating activities, ito yung magiging formula natin. Whereas, for investing and financing activities, you will do the same. Kagaya ng ginawa natin sa direct method. So, parehas lang. Ang difference lang nila is the operating activities. Right. So, again, ito yung formula natin under operating activities kapag gagamit tayo ng indirect method. So, let's start with the net income. So, wag malilito, si net income, makikita ito sa income statement or pwede nyo rin siyang makita sa comprehensive income, statement of comprehensive income. Pero, yung portion lang na net income, hindi natin kailangan dito yung comprehensive income. Kailangan natin dito yung net income. Income less operating expense. So, yung other comprehensive income or yung OCI, hindi siya kasama dito. Okay? So, net income plus mo yung non-cash expense. Example nga natin is yung depreciation. So, you'll arrive now at your operating income before working capital changes. Again, working capital is the difference between your current assets minus your current liability. So, i-add mo daw yung decrease in current assets other than cash. Ano ba yung mga current assets other than cash? Accounts receivable, inventory, prepaid expense. So, kapag nagkaroon daw ng decrease sa mga yon, decrease in accounts receivable, decrease in inventory, decrease in prepaid expense, then you have to add it. Increase in current assets. So, kapag tumaas yung accounts receivable mo, tumaas yung inventory mo, tumaas yung prepaid expense mo, you have to deduct. Then, you have to add the increase in current liabilities. Ano ba yung current liability? You have your accounts payable, you have your accrued expense. So, kapag tumaas daw yung mga yon, i-add mo siya. And kapag bumaba sila, i-deduct mo. Ma'am, bakit kapag tumaas yung current liability, i-add ko? So, kung tataas ang current liability mo, example is accounts payable, tumaas. So, credit, accounts payable, probably, debit, cash, or tama. So, kung tataas sila, magkakaroon ng addition sa normal balance sila na credit. So, kapag tumaas yung mga yon, dumami yung utang mo, 'Diba? Tumaas yung accounts payable mo, then you have to add it back. Whereas, kung bababa naman yung utang mo, syempre, paano bababa yung utang mo? Kung babayaran mo. So, kung babayaran mo yung utang mo, ibig sabihin, maglalabas ka ng pera. That's why dinideduct natin siya. So, you'll arrive at your net cash flow from operating activities. So, indirect method, you just have to focus on this formula. So, kapag na-familiarize nyo na itong formula na to and alam nyo yung logic behind it, hindi na siya, hindi na kayo malilito on how to compute for the operating activities under the indirect method. So, let's put it in a problem para mas maintindihan nyo siya. So, the comparative statement of financial position of ABM company in December 31, 2020 are shown below. So, this is your financial position or your balance sheet. Sabi dito, comparative statement. When we say comparative, 2 years dapat. You are comparing 2 years. So, these are your assets: cash, accounts receivable, inventory, prepaid expense, machinery, accumulated depreciation, automobile, accumulated depreciation, automobile. So these are your amounts for 2020 and these are for your 2019. So identify mo what are the current assets and current liability kasi later on gagamitin mo siya. So cash, ito yung concern natin ngayon. Ginagawa natin si cash flow statement, 'di ba? So si cash flow statement, ang magiging end amount niyan is ito. Dapat itong 3.5. Ito dapat siya makukuha nating answer dun sa statement of cash flow. So, later makikita nyo siya kung paano ba siya gagawin considering meron tayong beginning cash na 1,360,000. So, sa indirect method, gagamitin natin yung current assets and current liabilities other than cash. So, tanggalin mo si cash, Roxana, and then focus on your current assets and current liabilities. So, sa assets natin, ang current dito is si accounts receivable, si inventory, and si prepaid expense. Machinery is a non-current asset. Automobile is a non-current asset as well. And accumulated depreciation are contra asset accounts. So for your liabilities, you have accrued payable and accounts payable and accrued expenses. So these are current liabilities. Gagamitin natin yan later on. Whether there's an increase or decrease on it, malalaman natin kung i-add ba natin or isa-subtract natin siya to arrive at our cash flow from operating activity. Then you have your borrowings and other long-term activities. So word itself, long-term. So these are non-current liabilities. And then you have your ordinary share capital. Gagamitin lang yung share capital when you are working on a corporation. So basically, this is a statement of cash flow of a corporation. And then you have your retained earnings. Again, retained earnings, these are used as well in a corporation. So when we say retained, ito yung mga natirang income. Okay? So let's check. Baka may additional info. Okay. So the following information is made available to you. Number 1, the company has a net income of 2 million for the year 2020. Cash dividends paid and declared amounted to 350,000. The company purchased an additional machinery during the year. So, bumili daw ng machine. The company purchased a new automobile during the year. Bumili rin ng sasakyan. The company borrowed cash to finance their future plant expansion, which is payable in 5 years. So, unang utang daw for future plant expansion. And payable in 5 years, so long term. Ano ba requirement? Required tayo to prepare a cash flow statement for the year ended December 31, 2020. Okay, so first thing that you need to do is to analyze the changes in the entity's financial position. So you have your cash. How to analyze the change? You just need to deduct it. So yung cash mo 2020, 2019, yung change na is to 140. Same with accounts receivable. So dineduct lang, 250. 1,330, binawasan ng 1,450. So it's a decrease, bumaba. Same din dito, negative din siya. And then machinery tumaas. Ma'am, bakit tumaas yung machinery? Eh, di ba nagde-depreciate siya? Never naman po nag-appreciate. Di ba kayo na sa additional info, sabi din bumili daw ng bagong machinery. So, by just looking at the changes, malalaman mo na yung value ng biniling machinery is amounting to 560,000. Next, you have your depreciation na 110. The automobile, isa pa tong question. Ma'am, hindi naman tumataas yung value ng sasakyan. Bakit may positive change ka dyan? Again, sabi doon sa number 4, bumili daw ng bagong automobile si ABM company. So, that's why. Masasabi natin na yung value ng new automobile is 400,000. And of course, you have your depreciation. So guys, dito, makikita mo yung total assets is equal to your total liabilities and equity. It conform with the accounting formula na asset equals liabilities plus capital. So for your liabilities and equity, same din. Subtract mo siya to arrive at the change. So accrued expense, bumaba. Ay, dito meron kang borrowings and other long-term activities. Noong 2019, wala yan ha. But ngayon, may 1 million na dyan. Di ba yung number 5 kanina? Sabing ganun, umutang daw for future plant expansion, payable in 5 years. So, ito yon 1 million pala yung inutang. Next, you have your ordinary share capital, 300,000, tumaas. So, meaning, nag-issue ka na naman ng bagong shares. Nagbigay ka ng stock certificate sa stockholder mo. In return, binigyan ka niya ng cash na 300,000. And lastly, you have your retained earnings. So, retained earnings, tumaas siya ng 1,650. Saan kaya nanggaling yan? Di ba kanina may net income na 2 million, yung number 1 sa additional info. And then, nag-release daw ng cash dividends amounting to 360,000. So, definition again ng cash dividend, it's a distribution of income under corporation. So, kung 2 million, yung net income mo, binawasan ng 350, 1,650. So, yan yon. Yan yung naging change in retained earnings. Okay? So, next mo kailangan gawin, nagyan mo ng remarks. Si cash, ito daw yung should be net cash flow. Accounts receivable tumaas, so put increase in AR. Bumaba, decrease in inventory. Bumaba, decrease in inventory. Ito yung new machinery purchase. Sinulat lang na ito yung amount ng bagong biniling machinery. You have your depreciation. You have the value of your new automobile, depreciation ng automobile. And then for your accounts payable, increase in accounts payable, this is current liability. Then you have decrease in accrued expenses, this is current liability. Then borrowing for future plant expansion, again, ito yung inutang. Kaya siya tumaas. Then nag-issue ng ordinary share, and for your retained earnings, 2 million net income, 350 dividends sa shareholders. So, yung retained earnings mo ganito na itsura. Noong 2019 or last year, 2 million yung value niya. Add net income for this year, 2 million. Less dividends declared and paid, 350. So, yung retained earnings mo at the ending is 3,660,000. So, yung difference niya is yung 1,650 coming from here. Net income and dividends. Okay. So, next, na-analyze mo na, naglagay ka na ng remarks, follow mo na ngayon yung formula mo under operating activities, indirect method. So, sabi, start ka daw sa net income. Kaya ka nag-start dito, 2 million. Ito yung net income na nandoon sa additional information. Add mo yung non-cash expense. Isa lang naman yung non-cash expense. Ito yung depreciation mo lang. Ma'am, ba't 150? 110 lang to. So, 110 plus 40 na isa pang depreciation. So, doon ang galing yung 150. So, add. Total operating income before working capital is 2,160,000. Then, working capital changes, diba sabi, increase, decrease in current asset, current liability. So, ayan. Kapag daw decrease in current asset, add mo. Increase in current asset, minus mo. Increase in current liability, add mo. Decrease in current liability, minus mo. So, increase in AR. AR is a current asset, so minus. Decrease in inventory. Inventory is current asset, tas decrease daw. Balik ka dito, decrease in current asset, so i-add ko. Decrease in prepaid expense. Prepaid expense is a current asset, so in-add. Increase in accounts payable. Accounts payable is a current liability, in-add. Decrease in accrued expense. Accrued expense is current liability. Decrease daw. So, minus 40,000. So, 250 minus 250 plus 120 plus 70 plus 100 minus 40. Net cash flow from operating activities is 2,150,000. Okay. Next, sabi, si cash flow from investing daw is similar to that of the direct method. So, dito, tingnan ko lang, ang other term daw kasi ng investing is non-current asset activity. So, kailangan ko lang tumingin sa non-current. Itong apat, alam ko na to na current assets to eh. So, machinery lang tsaka automobile yung missing. So, 560, ito yung cost of purchase ko ng new machinery. Sabi rin sa additional info, bumili ka daw ng bagong machinery at bagong automobile. Kaya, negative to kasi bili. Purchase, outflow. So, negative 560 tsaka negative 400. Kaya, naging 960 yung net cash flow mo from investing activities. Alright. And for last transaction, for last activities, so cash flow from financing activities. So, ang other term nito is non-current liability activities and equity activities. So, dun lang ako mag-stick dito sa tatlo na to because this is a non-current liability activity and the other two are basically the equity activities. So, issuance of share capital, 300,000 equity. So, nandyan yan. Payments of dividends to shareholders, negative 350. Ito yung nasa additional info. And then, borrowing for expansion, 1 million. So, ma'am, bakit 350 lang yun nandyan, hindi 1,650? Kasi, di ba si net income, part siya ng operating, yung 2M doon. So, if i-combine mo naman sila lahat-lahat, magneneto pa rin siya ng 1,650. Pero ang goal kasi natin is to identify ano yung pumasok sa operating, ano yung pumasok sa investing, at ano yung pumasok sa financing. And si net income, word itself, it's net income activities or operating activities, kaya siya nandun sa operating. Whereas si dividend, dividend is an equity activity, equity transaction. That's why, nasa financing naman siya. Okay? So, ang total natin, 300 less 350 plus 1 million, net cash flow from financing is 950,000 pesos. Okay, so tapos ka na. Next mo nang kailangan gawin is the statement of cash flow. So, combine mo lang from operating to 150, investing, negative 960, financing, 950. So, pag pinag-add mo itong tatlo na to, makukuha mo yung net cash flow na to 140. Pero ang question kasi, how much is the cash ending? Ang cash ending is 3.5. So, paano kaya nakuha to? Meron ka kasing cash beginning. So, to check then, if tama ba yung answer mo, i-check mo yung trial balance mo ngayon. Yung comparative statement mo. Sabi rito, ang net cash flow mo is to 140. Ito yung should be net cash flow. Diba ito yung remark mo kanina? Should be cash flow. So, bangga. Next. Ang cash ending daw kailangan 3.5. Tama ba? 3.5 ba? Yun. So, 3.5 din. Para makuha pala yung 3.5, it's simply the net cash flow. Plus mo yung cash beginning, which is ito rin yun. 1,360. So, ganun siya. Ngayon, alam mo na yung cash ko na 3.5 galing dito sa mga to. It appears na, madami pala akong cash because earning yung company ko. Operating, mostly nanggagaling yung cash transactions. Kasi investing, negative. Si cash flow from financing, ito dahil sa utang siya primarily kasi nangutang ka nga eh. So, ganun siya. And